Welcome back to Groove of the Week. In this episode, we're going to be examining the bass part to Colibri by Incognito, which sounds something like this. So Colibri is taken from the Incognito album Tribes, Scribes and Vibes, which I got introduced to in my first term at music college many years ago, and it had a massive influence on me because prior to that, pretty much all I'd ever listened to were metal bands and Victor Wooten, so you can only imagine just how hideous my playing would have been. Anyway, one of my tutors at college put me onto Incognito, and this album in particular was hugely influential on me, and I spent countless hours tearing my hair out trying to make my bass sound anything like the great bass lines on the tracks. Now, Incognito as a band, obviously a hugely influential British jazz funk institution who've been around for about the last 400 years, and passing through their ranks have been many fantastic bass players, including, but not limited to, Randy Hope Taylor and Julian Crampton. And although Randy Hope Taylor is on this album, I always thought it was him playing on this track. And then relatively recently, I found out that the bulk of the album is actually programmed. Here we're dealing with a keyboard that thinks it's a bass. So we're going to be a bass emulating a keyboard trying to emulate a bass, which is quite a weird scenario. Anyway, that explains why some of the articulation and some of the lines are quite hard to translate to our instrument, because they were actually played on a keyboard, programmed in, apparently using a sample of a Music Man Stingray 5-string. Anyway, in Colibri we've got a 4-chord sequence starting off with a sort of B minor 7 over E, E9 sus, if you want to call it that. This is actually the same chord that we had a couple of weeks ago when we looked at Jamiroquai's Manifest Destiny. Same pretty much style of music, similar harmony going on. So the bass line to Colibri is great because it's a fantastic workout for double chromatic approaches into the root note of chords. So starting out this E9 sus, B minor 7 over E sound, we're playing this. Just root, and then from the flat 7 we've got a double chromatic approach into the octave. From there our next chord is going to be A7, A7 flat 13 really, and we're doing the same approach there, from the flat 7 double chromatic approach into the root. If I put those two things together, 3, 4. From there, third chord is going to be a sort of D minor 9 sound, and rather than playing the same approach again, we're just playing flat 7 and root. Now, when I first transcribed this, I was playing that, which is fine, but it makes life difficult when you get to the next chord. We're approaching a G minor 9, and again we've got that double chromatic approach from flat 7 to root. And trying to go proved to be a nightmare at tempo for me. I couldn't make that shift from this D down to the F clean without cutting off that D. So using an open string is my way around that. Obviously, as it's played on a keyboard, that's not an issue. You can do the jump without any problem whatsoever. It might be tricky initially if you're not used to balancing the sound of open strings and fretted notes in the same phrase. Open strings being slightly harder to control, but I think it's something that's worth persevering with. Many of my favourite bass players, including Anthony Jackson, James Jamerson and Jacko, all used to weave in open strings to their lines combined with fretted notes, and it always sounded seamless. So again, something I think is worth spending time on. So the whole line the first time round sounds like this. And then moving back into our E9 sus sound, we've got a double chromatic approach from above. So we're going F sharp, F, E. And then we're doing our chromatic approach from below, putting those together. Moving back to the A7 flat 13 chord, the second chord of the sequence, we've got the same double chromatic approach, a little bit of bonus material in the end, flat 7 to root. So those two things together. Moving into the D minor 9, we've got a couple of approaches again. We've got a sort of ghosted, muted A, I'm playing that as an open A, and then we've got an E. before we play our D. And then we've got our double chromatic approach back into the G for the final chord. Now at the very end of the second time, we get this nice little variation. So on first listen, it's kind of unclear as to whether it's a shake or a trill. Further investigation into the recording and programming of this album reveals that Richard Bull, the guy who programmed the bass line, said that on the sample library that he had, trills weren't available at that stage, so he had to fake it using the pitch wheel on a keyboard. So again, we're a bass faking the sound of a keyboard faking the sound of a bass. So you can obviously play that line up here. You might find, again, listen to your bass, let your ears be the guide, and your instrument will tell you where to play the line where it sounds best to your ears. So I find it preferable to play it up here. Got a bit more clarity than playing it here. Also, if you play it up here, you've got a big old position shift to come back around. So whole line in its entirety. 3, 4. So with trills, it can be hard initially to get a good, clean, consistent, even sound. So the thing to do, if you're not used to playing trills, you haven't spent a lot of time working on them, take it really, really slowly. The slower the better. Playing them slower will be harder and therefore better for you. And it's not, with legato technique, I don't think it's a question of hand strength or brute force. I think it's about speed and getting a good angle of the fingertips. So here we're trilling between F and F sharp. I'm giving the string a little flick with my middle finger on the way back to give it some more energy. So really, when you've got the hang of it at a slow speed, it's actually quite simple to speed it up. If you want, you can keep that going almost indefinitely, hopefully. And it's worth, I always say this, these things are worth doing. There's not always enough time. There's so many other things to practice, but I think it's worth getting a good legato sound from every finger. That was definitely something I used to practice as a teenager when I had far much more time than I do at the moment. Anyway, give it a go. Lots of double chromatic approaches. You'll notice that I'm using the same fingering all the time for every single approach. I'm always playing 1, 2, 4 instead of 1, 2, 3. Now, a while ago I made a fairly lengthy video about left-hand technique and why I use what is essentially double bass technique on the electric bass. Long story short, I feel like it gives you a more secure sound with less risk of injury. So there'll be a link appearing somewhere here to that video if you want to check it out. So if you have a groove of the week that you feel deserves wider recognition, then why not let me know all about it by leaving a comment below. It may well end up being a future episode.